Yeah, thanks for coming on a Sunday evening to talk about economics. I think that's maybe why there's not many people in the room. It's it's not the topic that many farmers pay as much attention to, even though it obviously governs our daily lives. Yeah, my name's Hamish, co-founder of Middle Ground Growers. We're a 16-acre farm in Somerset. Yeah, we're on sort of co-owned land, quite long-term project. We've got agroforestry, lots of nut trees, big solar barn. We do a couple of hundred veg boxes delivered by bike, all around Bath and Bristol. We do the same amount in wholesale, selling around all around the UK now, weirdly. We've got supplying organic north and Watson and Pratt and sort of organic wholesalers. So our veg is getting everywhere around the country. And my background before farming, previous life, was more in economics. So studied economics at undergraduate, and yeah, I also kind of grew up with like the economics of thrift, living on a houseboat from a young age, age 16. Studied more formal economics, kind of the mainstream economics, but also some alternative models. And then also sort of travelled around farms, discovered all these kind of alternative economic models, and yeah, noticed that most farms I'd sort of visit and work on would be absolutely smashing the growing, doing all the stuff, really like amazing, resilient people with really high skill, but actually the farm economics was so often the limiting block to like sort of enabling that kind of farm to like thrive as much as it can within today's difficult wider economic climate, obviously. So yeah, I'm quite interested to sort of bridge that kind of economics lens and some of the lessons we've learned from doing much more of the kind of financial forecasting and planning, to kind of bridge that to how we might apply those, hopefully in some way that's useful to you guys on your farms and projects. So yeah, we're going to dive into it. There's kind of two parts to this session. So well, sort of start with a bit of a bigger picture context, sort of economics of where we are and where we could be going, and sort of bigger picture, and then kind of zoom into the economics of growing. So actually some of the tools we use for like financials, cash flow, business planning, all those exciting things for a Sunday evening. But hopefully inspire you to sort of like go and do some of these tools for yourself. We're going to do a little crop profitability task, which kind of assesses how you can kind of work out which crops are actually just not worth your time. And so many growers that's growing like 70, 80, 90 variety of crops, and we need a good diversity, but we also need a functional diversity where we're not just like losing money on a load of crops, and we need to make sure we're sort of looking after ourselves and our long-term livelihoods. So I'll go into that kind of the detail of like the financials, the business planning, and then we'll go more into the kind of like the hands, like the kind of how we actually design for like financial success as much as we can do within these worlds. So this is going to look at the kind of other side. I see sort of farm economics on two sides. There's the economics for the food production, which is just incredibly tricky, like tight margins, actually sustaining that farm business to like tick over enough and to kind of plan and forecast for the future, so you can actually like obtain a yield, so you can actually like supply your livelihood, things like that. So that's going to be one part of it. But then the other part, are kind of trying to separate what we do at our farms. We separate that part with the actual, all the wider activities we're doing. So many farms here that are doing so much social and environmental good and all these things, and actually what's happening on most of those farms I've observed is they're kind of cross-subsidising each other, and all the income made, well the small amount of income made from those carrot sales is then going into like arranging these beautiful things and social things and volunteer days and planting more hedgerows and buying another polytunnel. And actually, in my view, all of these things, these sort of bigger one-off costs or these like social and environmental goods, kind of need other funding models. I think it's not sustainable to sort of channel our farm income into like these one-off. So for example, like a wetland on our farm can possibly fund that through 10, 20, 30 years of selling carrots for an extra few pence per getting a few pence per kilo extra on them. So I'm going to talk a bit about kind of our lessons from kind of other funding models like crowdfunding, how we can sort of design for like that vision of what we want, how we want to be on the farm, how we can thrive as much as possible within the current environment. And rather than kind of forecasting and coming from this scarcity mindset, how we can try our best to kind of actually like backcast, so financially backcasting, of actually looking at what's the vision we want to be, what's the hourly rate, how wanting to pay everyone properly, do all this, holiday pay, etc., and how we can backcast the finances using these tools to then kind of move towards that direction. And that might require other funding models. It might require crowdsourcing, it might require grants, but for us that's kind of one side of the work, which is, you know, for all these wider stuff we're doing on the farm, how we can actually creatively finance that, because we're doing so much regenerative work beyond just the food growing, which many farmers are not, which for me that defines a kind of regenerative and holistic farm, is, you know, doing all these beautiful things. So, without further ado, we'll jump into it. Just to get a sense of the room, so who's a grower in the room? The growers gathering. A grower or a farmer? Who's sort of growing on like 2 acres or less? 2 acres, more than 2 acres? Cool. Okay, that's good to get a sense of the room. So, bit of the bigger picture economics before we kind of dive into actually like on-farm economics, and sort of like to teach from that pattern to detail. So, yeah, this is sort of bringing it back to, we're not just going to talk about sort of finances and just the money, but actually when we're kind of designing like the holistic economics for our farm or for these projects, we've got to think about like economics is like about values. So it's about like the micro values on that day to day, but also the macro values, and we've also got to refine like what are the actual aims of this, like whether it's an economic plan for our farm, and what, you know, whether it's the wider picture, like the economic plan for, you know, the country. So we've got to like look at what's our actual aim for that. So I've got sort of donut economics here, so that's, for me, that's a good economic framework for this more like holistic and regenerative economics. Some of you might be familiar with it, and I just wanted to bring this up because, yeah, I guess for me, like farming links to so many of these things, both like the inner ring. The idea is this kind of donut is economics should be meeting our needs, so energy, food, water, livelihoods, all these different inner needs, but we should also be not breaching that ecological ceiling, so that, you know, wider planetary boundaries. So I bring this up because farming is actually at the heart of economics, and economics is at the heart of farming, because this farming kind of touches all of these things. And as you guys probably know, like all of these social issues that we face, lots of those sort of solutions are rooted in farming practice. And likewise, what happens when we kind of fall into this more linear economy, which is very like extractivist, very linear, we just produce, distribute, consume, dispose and waste. Then we get a sort of situation like this, where we have the shortfall of the social values of the economy. So we're not meeting social need, we're not obtaining those livelihoods, not having gender equality or political voice, etc., etc. And we're also going beyond these planetary boundaries. So that's the kind of economics where we are today. That's the kind of, I wanted to sort of bring that in because farming's so linked to all of these red areas, but also farming is so linked to the solutions to where we can be. So in terms of addressing nitrogen loading and the climate change, land conversion, biodiversity loss, farming's really at the heart of all these. So that's the kind of bigger pattern, but actually also on our farm, the same kind of patterns can apply. So the way we design economics on our farm and the way we think about economics on our farm, if we can think about it holistically, but also actually think about the business planning and the finances, then actually we also look at meeting the social foundation on our farm. So meeting, you know, those basics of whether it's that living wage or just just sorting those basics out of actually looking after the people and the health of the farmers as well, and also on our farm doing our bit for that kind of planetary boundaries, which many people at this growers gathering are doing so much. So moving from today's economics to tomorrow's economics in this kind of bigger picture intro, regenerative economics and the principles of a regenerative economy look at wealth much more holistically. So, example of that as farmers or growers, I don't know how many people are still really making loads of money farming, put your hand up if you're really economically thriving and making loads of money farming, but who feels like wealthy in other ways, like wealthy from like relationships or land collection or food or health, but it has to be if you feel there's like other forms of wealth, like, you know, social and spiritual, economic, relational, community, just things like this. It's just abundant, the other forms of wealth we sort of feel and exhibit in this kind of regenerative farming world. For me, a lot of this comes back to like a mindset, so how we approach economics, whether we approach it from this mindset of fear and this kind of competition, this quite exploitative separation economics, versus how we can flip that into like a spiral of love, of economics that's about belonging and place, value and diversity, collaboration, participation, and that's kind of a narrative of interbeing. So I bring this up because both it applies to the bigger picture, but also maybe on our farms, we can easily get fallen into the trap from today's mainstream economy of going into that economics of fear and scarcity, understandably, because we're so stretched. So how can we mimic that small spiral to kind of tomorrow's economics in our own microcosms, but as well as working on the bigger picture stuff to move towards that kind of more abundant economics? Because what happens if we go from the economics of scarcity and we set that out with our approaches to our farm or businesses, we kind of also help to create that reality of constantly chasing. I think that there is this kind of this identity of the sort of the pauper farmer and constantly struggling, and that's very fair enough because that's come from the very harsh economic realities of today. But I think we can also, to step out of that, we also need to sort of give ourselves the real like respect in the world that we actually know. This is our profession, and we deserve this. Deserve it to be a well-earning income stream. And so we'll talk a bit about how that might come to be. And I'm going to sort of use a framework of kind of permaculture economics as well. So sort of learned lots about sort of permaculture in practice over the years, applying it at scale and doing a big permaculture design for our farm. But for me, there's key principles here that are really important with how we apply economics to our farms in a regenerative, more abundant way. So one is to obtain a yield. That's a big permaculture principle. So you can't work on an empty stomach. So there's so many farming projects that go into their first 2 or 3 years, and I did this myself. It's very unpaid and prioritising the needs of all sorts of other things we're trying to achieve. But one sort of permaculture principle is to obtain that yield and really focus on that before we can then give and generate more. And another is to design from patterns to details. So this is a tool we use on our farm a lot. Is kind of looking at the macroeconomics and the pattern, which is kind of your bigger picture, like year on year, like cash. It's more kind of like profit and loss. It's looking at kind of annual cycles. It's looking at how you can actually budget for things through the year and keep track of that through the year. So every month we have a percentage to our income targets where we are. That's the kind of pattern, and then we go into the details of how does that relate to the day to day, how much time, how I can make decisions better on my day. So how we can assign the X amount of time to actually weeding, or do we need a different system which assigns this? My experience of organic farms is 40 or 50% sometimes can be, especially on smaller scale ones, can be taken up with the weeding, when actually for more generative farm economics we need to somehow just redesign that, so we're actually spending most of our time planting, seeding, doing the stuff that's really generating the direct value. Of course the weeding needs doing, but we need to find ways to make that kind of cost effective. So we're going to a bit of from the pattern to the detail. So it's kind of zooming out from this business costs and revenue to going into the real nerdy detail of what's the profitability of this single bed of carrots. If I put in X amount of time, X amount of seed, X amount of compost, etc., or for a field crop, I'm putting in this amount of time, this amount of diesel, etc., etc. What am I actually generating from that? And through using a few simple tools that we can maybe take some time in the winter to go through, I'm sure we all think in our heads and know what's the most profitable economic crop and that sort of thing, but through actually analysing that a little bit more from an economic mindset, we can kind of determine where we're actually just pouring our energy down the sink, and where we can actually obtain that yield, and maybe focusing on that and focusing on those crops. So it's just kind of asking, continuing on the day to day, does this make economic sense? If I'm digging X amount of potatoes, or if I'm this celery takes X amount of time to grow, does this make economic sense to put in X amount of hours to harvest and process and pack, and then I've lost 10p per head. And the tiny difference of losing 10p per head plus gaining 10p per head is it's the equivalent of having an extra member of staff 3 days a week at your farm for the year, and it makes a huge difference. So it's these little kind of micro detail day-to-day things make up that kind of bigger picture for your farm economics to thrive. So before I go into some of the tools for that, just wanted to kind of throw out the question of do you know your financial model for your farm? And what are the different options also that are out there? What might be other useful kind of ways to think about not just your farm enterprise, but all of maybe the wider work that's being done. So these kind of range from self-funded enterprises. I find there's actually very few farm examples that are actually fully like self-funded through the sale of foods. I've worked with like the NFU for a while, also conventional farms and things as well, and yeah, almost every farm I know is like some way sort of subsidy dependent, some way like not a fully self-funded enterprise. So I think that's part of the reason also why some of our like small and medium scale enterprises struggle so much, because we're kind of like trying to be self-funded enterprises in a market where actually no one no one really is. So that's why I sort of question that model, if that's actually, you know, viable and possible into the long term, or whether we need to look at other routes. So an example of that, I don't actually know the use of sort of riverford things, but an enterprise that sort of factors into all those costs of all the things coming just from the sale of those foods. Crowdfunding and kind of more like community support agriculture models, especially these are really good for like the startup capital, and sort of ambitious community-based projects that are going to have so much wider co-benefits than just like the commercial production of food, which is of course in itself an amazing value. Grant funded is another model, so that's like relies a bit on these kind of funding cycles. You've got like public grants, private, blended finance, all these different options. There's actually so much out there, and it's actually quite a good time in the kind of grant funding world at the moment, once you know where to look. So I'll provide a few tips on that later on. All those kind of investment options, like there's a really cool model about like community benefit societies and cooperatives. You can actually raise community shares. I know that Soul Farm did an example of that, and there's another example near us, Bath and West Community Energy. They raise capital through basically people in the community have money invested in that social enterprise. Instead of having money in a bank, they have it in that social enterprise. They might get a return, or it might be a return in kind of service, in like a bit of veg or something else, but they can actually have money. Say, you know, Susan down the road can have £3,000 into that venture to help support its costs, and that's just in money in there as a bank, and then there's a time you can kind of take out money. But it's it's basically a way for people to put the money into something that's like way more regenerative than like whatever it is, HSBC that's putting money into military and fossil fuel subsidies and things like that. So yeah, the investment model I would really consider as well, like sort of community benefit societies or co-ops, or creating community shares offers. It's a lot, you can kind of demystify it a bit. It's not as, it doesn't have to be as complex or scary as it might seem to sort of set something up like that for your projects. And my biased preference is the middle ground model, which is kind of what we go by, which is so this all works in our context. Is to kind of, we keep like the market garden enterprise and the actual sale of foods, that's its own like self-funded resilient model through customer base, through the veg box sales, that's kind of its own separate spreadsheet and accounts. And so the actual food, the market garden, the field crops, that sort of thing, that's all running through its own very carefully monitored financial flows and cash flows and everything like that. But then we'll actually seek support for when we're doing other stuff like wider ecosystem services. For example, we've got a £70,000 like pollinator project support from West of England Combined Authority, and that's enabled us to do amazing like wildflower strips and agroforestry perennial flower strips under the tree rows. Do like a nice flower wheel entrance garden, and all this stuff has like brought so much to the site, so much like beauty and wildlife and pest control and all these things. But that's had its own separate budget, separate coordination, separate labour. And yeah, it's something difficult to separate out because you want that holistic farm that has these blurred boundaries, right? But when it comes to economics, I think it's really important to separate, so you know that your main sort of enterprise, like the food, is kind of resilient in itself, or you know that it's not, and then you need to find something else or redesign or work out another financial model to make that more so. So that's the kind of different models. So yeah, if you haven't already, so have a reflect on like what your project, present or future, might be in terms of financial model, what might be suitable to your context with your aims. You might be more like social and therapeutic farm that has a very different funding model to a fully self-funded enterprise. And yeah, I guess this is sort of to throw the question out there: to what extent should these organic and holistic farms be purely run as enterprises through the sale of foods? And can that work? Can the market reward for that fairly, so that the farmers are not in poverty without hiking food prices? I don't know if that's possible within today's economic system. Maybe it is within tomorrow's kind of regenerative economy. But that's the kind of like the provocation and sort of invitation to think about today. and to think about what other funding models might exist. There's so many options out there for how to like get actually the right support for it. And I say it sort of as being a devil's advocate because I'm actually now going to go into how we can still also make the farms. I'm really passionate about like making small and medium scale farms like really thrive as much as they can, even though today's systemic things are stacked against them. I think it is possible. It's sort of yeah. So yeah, I don't know if anyone's got any sort of thoughts or inputs on that. We might just sort of chat with a neighbour for like a minute or two, just to sort of so everyone can have a chance to sort of share any reflections on that, of like to what extent can these sort of farms and projects run as fully self-funded enterprises. So we'll just do like a minute each sharing with the neighbour, and then maybe a couple of people will just feedback your thoughts. I'm quite keen to hear and learn from you as well. Yeah, come back together in a couple of minutes. Okay, we're a bit short for time because we started a little late, so I'm just going to gather like maybe one or two people to share any sort of pertinent thoughts or reflections that came from that discussion. Anyone like to share? You can either shout or if you like, you can come in. Say from the mic if you've got a quiet voice. Hand up to share. Yeah, the half hand at the back.
Other funding models, I'd say, part-time approach, use some kind of part-funding yourself, which is not exactly viable. It's not for everyone.
Yeah, so I think if I heard it, so the sort of part-time route of sort of mixed income streams, farming and otherwise. Yeah, and that's it's quite very common in a lot of our neighbours. Sort of more conventional farmers make their money from contracting work and then farm on the side, which is a great shame, but that's one of the other funding model. Yeah, any other thoughts from your discussions?
So we're saying to a large extent they're going to be reliant on grant funding, but then we're saying it's frustrating because when you don't want to incite competition with small and medium-sized farms, to sort of have like a proof to deserve that grant funding. And it's frustrating because a lot of these need to be in place to start things up, whereas in larger scale agriculture, the subsidies that people get are in retrospect. So they say, all right, I've already grown this, so in subsidy of this, they don't get help, whereas on a smaller level, you need to prove that from the offset, which is frustrating to have that level of competition.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, with that, that sort of question and provocation in the mind, we're going to sort of look a little bit about how we can, even within this sort of tricky economic system, when the odds are kind of stacked against like small growers, like you said, how we can kind of still kind of like tweak the system within where we are growing to kind of design for as much economic abundance as we can. So we're going to sort of look a bit at kind of like key economic indicators for like a viable farm enterprise, and also look a bit at like crop profitability, approach to like the day-to-day, but also the bigger systems and the kind of cash flow and revenue and all these things. Because yeah, my observation is that most farms do this to a level, but doing like one more step of it, we've realised has actually just helped us really plan and forecast for like we can kind of like design for that like backcasting, so we can actually create the vision for what we want for that year and kind of backcast from that and see what we need to do to make sure we're kind of all like obtaining that yield and maintaining our livelihoods. And then after that, sort of go into more of like how we can look at those other funding models for like the wider work. So yeah, we'll do a few sort of tips on crowdfunding. We've learned a lot from a big successful crowdfunder for sort of startup costs. We'll also look at kind of like grant funding for like specific project bundles, which I think it's really sort of wise to like seek external help for that rather than fund through the farm business. So yeah, I guess I sort of summarised kind of some key variables for success. So putting our kind of economic hats on when we're kind of like designing our farm systems or designing our sort of balance sheets for the year. So put at the top, labour approach. So this is a really key thing. Labour's going to be usually your biggest farm cost in the year. So how we actually like manage that labour on the day-to-day, how we like make decisions for that labour based on kind of sometimes putting those economic hats on, so we can know we can actually like afford to spend X amount of time on this, or whether we need to actually redesign that. Workflow systems and efficiency. So this also comes from like a permaculture design lens of actually like designing things in the right spaces from the get-go to kind of mean those like workflows and the kind of day-to-day efficiency really works really well, from like the minute detail of like where the bag, all these things you guys probably think about in your day-to-day, of like where the bagging station is compared to the weighing station, how many movements we're going from the wash station to the cooler, and these little things you can do to sort of tweak the system to kind of develop this like lean farm approach. There's a great book by Ben Hartman which kind of looks at this, goes really into the nerdy detail about kind of how we like minimise all those kind of like waste outlets of time and energy. Like we don't value our time and energy enough, sort of spending a lot of time walking around in circles, or from this part of the farm to that part of the farm, or we've got like surplus tools or crates that don't stack. All these things we can kind of just lean down and like have a sort of almost a minimalist approach to that kind of day-to-day farm labour. And then another big factor for us has been like suitable infrastructure and productive use of space. Any sort of storage space or surplus space on the farm that's kind of been unused, or it's not kind of it's not conducive to the kind of economic thriving of our farm or other aims of the farm. Kind of thinking creatively around that. So we've got an old shipping container that's insulated. Can we like grow mushrooms from that? Can we stack sub-enterprises? Can we do microgreens in the spare propagation tunnel in the winter? Can we look to use this spare barn space as like a kitchen to up value products as like a sub-enterprise and use our waste streams? So how we kind of think about all these niches and spaces on the farm, kind of with our economic hats on, but also those kind of creative like permacultural and sub-enterprise hats. Key for us I think has been like relationship building and like focusing on the people. So the kind of internal web of the farm and the collaboration, but also the external links. So building those networks in community, and then when it comes round to something like the farm is in need, or you need to do a big crowdfunder to raise funds for a new barn, then for us we were like in a position we'd already built those relationships. We already had the good community trust. We had then like 500 people supporting us with a crowdfunder to sort of fundraise for these startup costs. And again, just like reputation and uniqueness for what's your kind of selling point? What's your unique thing that you're offering? For us, it's been like bike delivered organic veg boxes, whizzing around Bath all the time. That's the kind of like unique part that kind of convenience as well, delivered to your door. There's lots of choice rather than a kind of a sort of more limited CSA. So it's kind of finding your context and what people want in your area. So many farms don't do like the market research. They'll find out what they want to do or what they think people will like, but actually it's just really key to do all that market research way before you start to grow, because once you design those crop plans, put those seeds into place, like it's too late to sort of tweak to what the actual demand is sometimes. We're going to look a little bit at crops as well, because I think like honing in on your like crop profitability is really important for like that overall profitability. You've only got a certain amount of space on that land, and if you're growing half of it with crops that are losing you money every week or etc., then your income's going to drop significantly. So in terms of crops, we've kind of got these like key factors. So we kind of assess all of our crops each year, get excited, go into like the nerdy spreadsheets and just actually look at how crops have actually turned out in terms of some of these factors and variables. So it especially applies to like a market garden where you've got quite limited space, but I think also for field crops, just to really look at like what's how to really optimise that cropping. And we've kind of over the years kind of more ruthlessly just got rid of crops that don't make sense for us, basically the ones that are very high risk of disease in our soils, or the ones that are really like long days to maturity and they're in the ground for such a long time and they require so much weeding, or they're like very high input in terms of labour, or in terms of like they need loads of like compost or inputs, things like that. So this is kind of like the summary of what ticks the boxes, and then we kind of put that into like a simplified scoring system about like what our crop profitability index is. So again, easier to do if you've got less crops. Obviously, we've kind of gone from a variety of like 90 to 70 to 50, and it's, as I said earlier, it's kind of about finding a functional diversity that's still really diverse in terms of rooting depth and soil health and biodiversity, but finding one that's like functional to like really hone in on those plant relationships to actually get to know those crops and how they grow really well. Like there's whole plant science, and there's, you can read manuals and manuals for like cauliflower crop production and really hone in on the detail, but you can't do that if you've got 90 crops. But if you're growing, I'm not saying specialised to like a monoculture, but say find a functional diversity where you can hone on the ones that you do really well, and then your customers will really like benefit from the quality of that as well. So do a little activity to kind of like reinforce that message. Out of interest, does anyone kind of do this for their crops? Does anyone kind of analyse like the profitability, like in terms of actual numbers? Hand up if you're a farmer or grower that's doing that. So how do we know if they're going to actually be losing us money every year? How do we choose our crop plan? Is it based on what we like, or what we think that the CSA members might want, or based on one feedback of one person? I think we've got to start from this in a way, because that can rule out the crops that we shouldn't do. So we're going to do a little activity. So maybe pick a crop that for you is kind of like on the border, like you think maybe it's profitable for me, but maybe it's not really. Because I think a lot of people will know like their most profitable ones usually, and people will probably know the ones that are less so. But maybe looking at something that's kind of in the middle will maybe help to see what that line is, where you might want to kind of get rid of some crops, or there might be other profitable crops you haven't considered that you want to bring in instead. So it can provide opportunities. Out of interest, what are people's most profitable crop? Do you want to just sort of a few shout out like pinball, if you know them? What's your most kind of economic crop that seems to make most economic sense for you? Tomatoes? Yeah.
We have flowers back here.
Flowers? Yeah. Great. Squash?
Loofahs.
Salad? What was some of that?
Loofahs.
Loofahs, nice. Asparagus, yeah, very high value. Strawberries, yeah. And and I guess if we think of profitability in the broader sense, like including all of the costs and all of the, for example, asparagus, you might have to wait a few years. So the opportunity cost of that 20-metre bed of asparagus might be actually not having a crop of 200 bunch of radish every 30 days, for example, which is suddenly 10 grand. So that's kind of what learned from sort of my background in economics, is actually like, not just looking at the face value of it, like strawberries are high value, tomatoes are high value, and I'm sure they are like the profitable crops in your context, but when we look at all the other variables as well, like the input efficiency and the labour efficiency, so if, for example, we've kind of almost potentially not going to grow tomatoes next year because all the labour time involved, we just calculate how many actually hours we're putting into them, and how many inputs and all the sort of stringing up and all the different things. We tend to make a lot less money on them than like doing some cucumbers with an understory of parsley. That's nearly twice as profitable as the tomatoes. And if you can it's not too much to work out. If you can just gather that data in the season, I just keep phone notes out in the field. If you can just build that database, get really curious about it, just like with soil health, get really curious about it, and add up these data variables, then you get a much better idea of what you're doing, basically. So we're going to do a little activity to kind of just to kind of reinforce that. It might be something you want to take home and kind of look at some of your borderline crops that are like maybe profitable, maybe not. and just try and give them a bit of a scoring. So these are kind of 4 variables. You might want to choose different variables in your context. And also you can go really nerdy with this and we've got a spreadsheet with like 10 variables, looking at all the different crops to really analyse like what works. But I think these are like the key ones. It's like 1 is like the value, that's your price per kilogram, and then 2 is like the kind of kilograms per acre or per bed. And then I think your labour efficiency is huge. That's a huge factor, is like how much actually time you're putting into it at, that cost of labour, and your own time and the opportunity cost of doing that versus tending to another crop or finding new customers or etc. etc. And then the input efficiency. So some crops just need a lot. We don't do climbing beans because they're just so much. We're also in a very exposed condition in our context, so lots of wind and things, so it's just not worth all of the infrastructure and the poles and the trellises and etc. We grow bush beans that are very productive and have a sort of good market for. So look at the input efficiency, how much like materials or compost or tractor weeding or etc. you're putting into, and try and just choose a crop of your choice and just note down like a score for each of these. So you might want to put like tomatoes value. It's on a scale of 1 to 5, so value is quite high. So maybe 4 for tomatoes, asparagus might be a 5, or loofahs might be higher, I'm not sure. Yield quantity for tomatoes, like you're looking at across the year, so you've only actually got a summer crop, quite a small window for tomatoes, especially this year it felt. It was like, season was almost over before you knew it. So if you've only got that window of like 10 weeks or something of actual income, then what's your yield across the year versus like radishes that you might crop all year round, or perpetual spinach or something. The yield quantity across the year for tomatoes might only be a 2 or a 3 potentially. You might have heated greenhouses in case you're different contexts. And then rate your labour efficiency. So if tomatoes you're putting in quite a lot of labour, then maybe put like a 1 or a 2, quite low labour efficiency. And your input efficiency, there's lots of compost, lots of seaweed fertiliser and things going on to these tomatoes, then maybe put the input efficiency quite low to medium maybe. But it might be different in your context. So this is the key thing is to kind of design this and have some sort of simple tool where you can look at your own crop profitability and really determine actually what makes sense for you to grow, for you to actually have obtain that yield and get that livelihood, and pay people well and do all those things. So yeah, have a go. If people have got paper and pens, there's post-its here at the front as well if anyone wants to jot them down, or you can add up in your head. But choose a crop of your choice, something that might be quite marginal, or you might be thinking maybe is it worth growing or not. And just add up your scores, and then we're going to share the scores at the end to see what you've got. Yeah, there's a hand up there.
So you said you had 10 variables that you looked at?
Yeah.
And these are the top 4?
Yeah, I'd say these are the most key for us. Yeah.
You mentioned the other ones.
Yes, so some of them are here. I actually don't have a screenshot of the spreadsheet, but we've also got things like days to maturity of the plant, because we're cropping on a small space. We've got a few variables about like the actual customer demand, and yeah, there's a few other bits on the previous slide as well. So yeah, a little bit in terms of processing and like washing all the time put in. Yeah, there's a few I can't quite remember from the spreadsheet, but also happy to share some of our spreadsheets because they're quite useful tools. Yeah, I do a bit of farm consultancy now, and I just sort of help some small farms. We just go through some of their crops, and then we can get numbers quite quickly. And you'll get different scores for these amounts. So you might get like, for a really amazing crop that's got 5s and 4s for most, you might have like 18. That's like, parsley is like an 18 or a 19 for us. That's great. Perpetual spinach is well up there, radishes are up there, squashes, sort of 14, 15. But then you can kind of like determine a line where you think, actually, I'm losing money on this. And then you can hone in on that and say, actually, what are the extra numbers I'm putting in the seed, etc. It's just a useful tool. This is one tool of the economics, but then you've got to look at the same for like your labour, your inputs, your other stuff, and then build up this exciting picture where you really get to know your land and your business, so you can sort of build that kind of economics for thriving. So yeah, have a little go, take a couple of minutes or so, and then we'll maybe share some scores of like crops. You might have some surprises of something that you thought was maybe profitable but it's maybe not, or vice versa. Yeah, have a go and let us know in a couple of minutes.
think it's just what happens with it.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I'm mostly just in it. Yeah, yeah. Cover it up, it's kind of the holes.
Okay, has anyone got a score they'd like to share with us, or a reflection or anything? Yeah,
Yeah, but scored 10 tomatoes.
tomatoes 10. Cool. Okay, somewhere in the middle.
So kind of, yeah, kind of low.
Yeah, a bit lower than you might have expected, or yeah. Yeah, and again, it really comes with comparison, because once you've done a few other crops, and also once you've got a bit more data maybe of like we know like roughly how much time goes into the polytunnels, and that sort of, once you can build that data and that picture, then you can kind of compare like for like. This is kind of like an approximation, which does give you a good idea, but yeah. Cool. Any other crops estimates we've got? Yeah. Garlic, 16, yeah? Cool. Yeah, garlic's a good one, yeah? Is that overwintering or sort of spring garlic, yeah? Cool. Yeah. Any others? Any surprises? Yeah. Microgreens, cool, 16, yeah. So maybe a bit more like materials input and that sort of thing, but quite high value, good yield per square metre. Yeah. Cool. Nice. Awesome. Do you want to know our top 5? Oh, go on, you go first. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, we probably would. Yeah, we're more interested in, rather than trying to be self-sufficient or grow everything for every box ourselves, we're kind of looking at more like producer co-op model, and yeah, kind of actually items that don't make sense for us we can buy, and actually we sell just as much wholesale as we do veg boxes. So we can, our key crops we can actually then sell on to other veg box schemes. We provide Community Farm and a few others, provide some wholesalers. So yeah, it makes sense for us to be selling 1,000 cucumbers a week and buying some tomatoes from down the road that are organic and great. That's just our kind of model, because that works a lot better economically, and and for the growers to really hone in on those crops a bit. Yeah. Cool. Any other numbers or crops people want to share? Want to do like root crops? Yeah.
Yeah, I tried estimating the carrots, but I have no idea about the pricing.
Okay. Yeah.
Those was rather the same.
Yeah. Yeah. You can sort of just approximate.
It's kind of low input
Yeah.
in a way, other than filling them out.
Yeah. Cool. Nice. So maybe somewhere in the middle, because they're sort of quite, but maybe they're sort of quite low value per kilo in our kind of. A lot of those root crops are quite, they're very much sort of down priced. But yeah, like you said, potentially low input. Just sort of seeding them directly and harvesting. Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
I say like celeriac.
Yeah.
Because celeriac is pretty easy, but nobody wants it. you get like such crazy yields out of it, but and like it's really not that hard. It's frustratingly hardy, but nobody.
Yeah, you can't kill it. Nothing. Even the pests don't eat it, right? So no one wants it.
It's always the last thing.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good example. Do you want to know our top 5 when we did this? We're doing about. I think tomorrow we've got on the harvest is 60 kg of perpetual spinach, and it's just such, and it's going, we put it on sort of wholesale lists and it goes straight away. So we're very lucky to have built those relationships. But it's one of those crops, and then it's back the next week, isn't it? I mean, it's a no-brainer. So yeah, these crops we try and like really hone in on those things. We try and like produce a few hundred bunch of radish a week, and because they're very they're either quick cropping, so the radish, they're grown in 25 days. You look away, they're popping up and they're going. Or so they're quick cropping, or they're kind of like multi-cropping and kind of cut and come again. That's what we found is really economical for us. So some beds, will be cropping so many times, because we kind of take quite a soil health centric approach and do a lot of the kind of min-till and a lot of the cover crops and things, we can actually ask that of our beds because we're giving so much back to them. So this sort of the economics links to obviously all the soil health approaches. But yeah, we're sort of doing about, this year it's been way more than we expected, but we're doing about £2,000 a week wholesale and £2,500 a week veg boxes, and that's on about, we're on 16 acres, but we're only cropping 9 of that, and the market garden produces most of the food on that 2 acres. So most of those quick cut and come again greens and the quick crops like radish and spring onion. So the market garden's probably getting about £100,000 a year, because we're on forecast for £200,000 a year income for the year. The field crops we're sort of a bit more newer to, but we're refining those systems, and that's still producing a really good amount because we kind of brought some of these bio-intensive applications into the fields. Yeah.
I don't think it's too early for a question, sorry.
No, go for it. I like it.
But like, say with tomatoes, you only have them for 3 months. Why would you calculate that for across the year? Because when they're not in that space, you've got other stuff in that space. So why wouldn't you calculate it for like?
Yeah, that's true. I guess the point is sort of if you had it even in the same window of time, for example, we could have a parsley crop that we can keep in for a longer time and actually get a lot more from that bed with cut and come again. But yeah, no, it's a good point, especially up with polytunnels where you've got really limited space. I guess this is also kind of assuming you've got to put more in when you just got one crop in, you've got that kind of cut and come again, you've got it there. Whereas when you're flipping the beds and taking out tomatoes and putting another crop in, there is it's another crop. It's got its own economics of a new crop, more time put in, more planting, more plants, more seed, more seeding compost. So I guess it's a factor, but you're right, it's not a perfect metric because, yeah, like I said, you can have tomatoes and then you can have your winter parsley and something else. So yeah, that's a good point there.
Do you account for I don't know if you ever undersow a crop with something else? How would you account for that?
Yeah, so I guess that would be more if you look at the economics of one bed. So this is kind of more looking at crops, because the purpose of this tool is not necessarily for what goes in there and what year. It's more just am I going to grow that crop, and is that how economical is that for me? Whereas if you want to go into the economics of the bed and how we design the bed system, then that will have a slightly different economics. So I guess this is one example of one branch of the business. We can take that economic approach and kind of get a bit nerdy about it and just put a bit of time in winter. Once you practice it a few times, it's not too much, but yeah, then you can kind of apply that. But I'm going to whiz on through because I want to get into the kind of also some tips on kind of other financing creative methods to do around this as well. But just to quickly mention, to kind of zoom out a little bit, so I'd really advise one key takeaway today is if you could look at cash flow of your business and the month by month, but also the week by week inflows and outflows. Does anyone do that in some level? Maybe monthly or 3 monthly? No, I don't think many farms do. So this is how you can just really make sure, fairly common sense, just you're covering your costs on that week-to-week basis. So this is how we define our labour budget. It's how we define how much we can put into this. It's how we define if we need to find some more customers next month, or if we need to get another wholesale customer, etc., etc. So at the moment, this is a very broad, simplified summary, but we know that our weekly income, 2,500 for veg boxes, and this was done at the start of the year, is 1,500 from wholesale. It's now gone up a bit, so that's £4,000 inflow. And each week we employ 25 days labour, about £100 a day, so that's 2,500. And then it's more tricky to average the rest of your costs. How do you cash flow them? So that's where a bit of financial tools and basic spreadsheets and things, or zero accounting, other tools come into play, because then we can look at our costs across the year, and then we can average them out across week by week, or month by month, or we can even plug in when we've got big costs onto the spreadsheet tools, and then we know roughly in that month we've got an average outgoing cost of £900 with this is your overheads and direct costs. So there's the labour cost, which is the biggest one for us, and then there's the kind of other ones like seed, water, utilities, etc. Averaged out. So we just divide the total annual by the number of weeks, and that's about £900 a year for us. So our total outflow is 3,400. So we know that week by week, all things going well, we've got an average cash flow of £600 plus. So that's kind of what we aim for, 400 to 600 per week through the year, and that just covers us. So for if we want to expand or do another sub-enterprise the next year, or if we want to up the wages, or if we want to or if there's unexpected costs, so we had a delivery bike break, or we kind of factor those into the weekly average costs. But if there's like loads of those unexpected costs, then we've kind of got that buffer. So I think I'd really encourage you should be like aiming, even though it's very, people in our kind of world and circles are very uncomfortable about it, you should be aiming for like that profit per week, even though it's really tricky, because actually, yeah, if you aim for just like break even, then it'll probably end up being like less, or you won't have enough to cover those unexpected costs. So look at the weekly cash flow. You can sort of do a bit of a back of an envelope, but then kind of try and gather the data and try and monitor it. And then also you can build up the monthly picture, so we know, we can then see if there's like going to be a time of year that's going to be really tricky, and we need to kind of like cash flow better, or we need to kind of try and bring some income forward for that month. So we can look at like maybe in April there's a lot less income, so we need to like, that's another reason why we need to design for profit for the rest of the year. So we can cover that month or that more tricky phase, or we can do something to even out, so we have more outlets, or we have more workshops to do something else for that time of year, and it just enables us to make better decisions on the day to day. And yeah, just the last point on cash flow is this really important, because you can have a half-acre farm that has a positive cash flow or a negative cash flow, like maybe it's losing £50 a week, and maybe that seems like a little bit, but that adds up over the year to like be in decline. Whereas you can have similarly like a 5,000 acre farm that's got this tiny cash flow difference. They might have £1 million going out and £1 million coming in, but they might still have the same cash flow. So all of that extra stuff for like the same end of the month result of that cash flow is like negative £50. So their overall like bigger picture yearly thing is kind of a similar picture. And that's why the cash flow is just really important, because whatever scale you're at, that will kind of determine how you can like design for the next year. So we'll touch on sort of business planning and a couple of the other tools quite briefly, and then we'll sort of move on to like some of those other funding models we mentioned. Hands up if you've got a business plan for your farm. Okay. Cool. Or project, or yeah. Cool. So yeah, really encourage it. It helps you to sort of like get to grips of like the vision and what you're doing, because then you can set your economic aims, you can set your social aims for the year, and then you can kind of backtrack from there and actually work out what do we want to achieve with this. It doesn't have to be as big and scary as you think, but it really also encourages you to do some of the market research. It's also really essential if you want to do some of those things like crowdfunding, like we could share our kind of business proposal and what the actual thing is. If we want to like raise community shares, or attract investors or other forms of capital, we've kind of got that ready to go. So I would really just encourage that, and kind of have really clearly stated aims, develop that vision with a team, really nail that down, and then kind of revisit it every year. Like in the winter we try and come back to visioning, and this really, my key point here is like this really links to the economics and that design of your farm. Like it's not separate from it, like that bigger picture vision and that holistic side, you're going to be able to achieve that by forecasting well, by doing some of this boring stuff, by looking at the crop profitability of that single carrot bed. It's really important. And yeah, just to touch on that, this is our kind of like holistic economics, like our kind of aims that we set out in like 2020, which we're largely now meeting, pleased to say, through lots of boring stuff like doing profit and loss calculations, etc., etc. So this is our kind of the sort of income figures over the years. So we actually started a bit before this, but technically a year one of the more business doing veg boxes was 2021. And we did actually, in the business plan, we did forecasts to like lose a bit in the first year, and we looked at all the variables and said, okay, at least we know, because this is the benefit of doing all these financial planning tools. Like you don't need to necessarily like adjust the numbers to make sure you're in the green. Just like do it realistically, and then you can see if you're in the green or not, or likely to be, and then you can plan for that. So you can plan for that by looking at alternative funding models, or by tweaking the design, or being like, actually, let's get rid of that crop, or let's like downscale this, or like make this labour decision, and then you can plan for that and finance for it. And seek support with that as well if you want, because it's not everyone's game of tricks. There's people that support farms to do this. Plugging my own consultancy here, but there's like people that can help with this, or like maybe there's within your networks, build those relationships, people that can like sit down with you. Sometimes just for half a day and go through those things in winter will like change your farming and thriving, and you kind of that obtain a yield piece. But yeah, so that's sort of a bit of business plan. Business plan, profit and loss, all the bigger picture stuff, and a bit limited on time, so I wanted to sort of whiz ahead into like alternative funding models, but also like funding these things. Like farms shouldn't be expected to like pay all those startup costs, pay all those big one-off direct costs like buying a new polytunnel or expanding into this sub-enterprise, like to try and scrape around and do that just from the sale of veg is so tricky and so impossible, and there should be so much, government support for it. There should be all these funds, and they're kind of, over time, there kind of are more of them actually. If you actually look out for them, there are these funding pots around, and now people are becoming more switched on to like the benefits of, the farming and nature and, these regenerative solutions. Actually, there are more and more of these things available, and the public awareness of it has sort of shifted into a new kind of Overton window of like, actually, people are becoming more on board with this after seeing like food shortage crises and all these different problems. So the time is right for it. You just got to like kind of step out of that like identity of like, I can't get any help or this sort of thing, of which I do in the early years of farming. It's really easy to be in that, but actually be like, no, we're like doing this profession. We're like providing so much social, environmental, economic good, like rural economy, all these things, ticking all those boxes that also a lot of those funders are looking for, and a lot of people are looking to support in your community. So a few tips on crowdfunding. So we ran a successful, it was like a 10-week campaign. We raised 95,000 in that 10 weeks with over 550 supporters. And what we did, our approach to that was we really set out the vision and then backcasted. So that's what I'm trying to like reinforce today, is to kind of set those goals and then backcast to what you really need for that. So we figured out for that first year we need that 95,000 as a bare minimum to like do the solar barn, do all the infrastructure, get the delivery bikes, the polytunnels, pay the wages for the first 6 months, and do all these things we need to do to actually set up basically a farm from scratch. Before that, we'd also had years of setting up with more economics and thrift. I'd had years like starting from totally nothing and just saving up just to like buy the first polytunnel and doing that sort of thing. But then when we were in the position to actually do that crowdfunder, then we actually had all the support for it. So the key messages for this are kind of like preparation. So it's not just a 10-week campaign. Like plan 6 months in advance if you can. Especially for a bigger crowdfunder, but even for smaller ones, the more you can like, tell people about it, go along to all those like groups, find the gatekeepers of your community, those people that are in the WhatsApps, they know everything going on, like find those people that are going to be able to sort of like support that vision and spread the word. Also press releases, do all this thing, like draft everything, try and secure like a third of your funders in advance. That's really key, because the ones that are successful are the ones that like start and they suddenly the funds go up like in the first day or two. Then they get bumped to the top of the page. With crowdfunder, you get out there straight away. People see it's like, oh wow, it's like a psychological thing. They're like, oh, already 20 grand is raised, so people want to get on board, want to support it. So try, if you can secure those funders in advance, then once you've got a third of the way in a crowdfunder, you're often, if you've done that quickly, you're often gonna do the rest. So like, secure that in advance, because you don't have enough time in like that crowdfunder window to like find all those people whilst you're doing it. Like try and secure that before. And the narrative, the story, the messaging is really important. So yeah, having that narrative around what you're doing, like the social environmental good, using the right language. So for us it wasn't necessarily about like organic or things, because that wasn't necessarily like resonate with people. It was like we were in like an area where there used to be loads of local market gardens. We drew on that, like more the tradition of it. We actually used very specific language, and it wasn't just about environmental. We did talk about like ecological farm for Bath, but we were also talking about like restoring wetlands and hedgerows and these things that we found through being nested in that community that were important to people. So the narrative, not just what you want to hear, but what other people do, and have a really clear vision. Like develop that before you do the crowdfunder. Have those objectives, the implementation, show it's going to be pragmatic, it's going to be a worthwhile investment, and these same points kind of go for like funding in general. So like grant funding. If you want to like raise support or community shares, these are all kind of key things as well. Context and timing, so releasing it at a time when actually people are going to be not in the middle of school holidays. Our context was like it was just post COP26 or something, and everyone was kind of feeling like, oh, no one's doing anything about this climate stuff, and then suddenly you come in with like this quite grounded solution on the ground for what people were doing. People really wanted to get behind it. There was also like, it was around COVID time, there were empty supermarket shelves, people like really saw the vision and understood it. So the context and timing is really key. And of course like the passion, the energy and the purpose, like really don't be afraid to shout about it even though it's uncomfortable. It kind of, I don't think we would have gone out and done all the social media stuff if it wasn't for like kind of being uncomfortably encouraged into like doing the crowdfunder to actually do all those things. But the relationships that built because we shouted about it is still fruited to this day. Like the main benefits from that crowdfunder were not the pot of money, it was all those kind of like web weaving that we did and all that beautiful stuff in that time. So I don't know if this will work, but there's a video of our crowdfunder to kind of like reinforce that, like what messaging we use and how that's really important. We kind of like drafted a very particular script which use specific language and kind of aim to resonate with our community. But I don't know if that's going to work. I think it's on YouTube. It's Middle Ground Growers, Ecological Farm for Bar. I might try and get it at the end if you like. But and yeah, thank you for said. So it was a very broad, ambitious vision, but we've now like implemented that. So we've also gained that trust in our community. We've built the solar barn, designed the farm from scratch. We've implemented the 10 acres of agroforestry, the market garden, and we've kind of got a sense of, even though it's still tricky, we've got a sense of what it is to like have slightly more freed up in terms of like the vision, in terms of being supported for that first year. And that just means like you can design all your systems to be way more like effective and thought through and things like that. So yeah, that's just sort of extra reason of kind of why to kind of design it that way and do the kind of financial backcasting. So I think I'll finish off in a minute because we're pretty much out of time. But yeah, a lot of these sort of common those sort of bits of advice also apply for like funding applications and grants. So if you're looking at doing specific projects like a wetland, like a wildflower meadow, yeah, don't try and just like cover it through your small veg, and kind of try and like look at these and like be organised. Like you can set like search alerts for when like these grants come up on these various organisations. You can like develop drafts and documents so you can, when you can apply, kind of ready to go when it's a short deadline. And yeah, similar things to the crowdfunding, like look at covering your realistic costs, ensure it's a funding relationship you want to engage with, and the key point here, which I kind of finish on, is like, yeah, try and keep that side of it kind of separate from the main like farm income accounts. Like, I think that's why we've been like resilient enough into the long term, and we've also like we've got a profitable business, but also we've got support for the wider social and ecological work. It's because we kind of keep those separate as much as we can on the accounts and with the labour, so we can actually grow food and make sure that that business is ticking over as well as it can through those tools that I've talked about. But we can also like ensure we can meet those more ambitious goals of like why we're doing it, like environmental solutions, social solutions, having more people on the land, people more connected, developing like those rural economies and producer cooperatives. We can develop those things and develop sub-enterprises and all this, but not necessarily as like a drain from our small minimal farm income. Try and keep those separate. Just to reinforce that point of like backcasting, work backwards from the vision rather than kind of this scarcity approach. And this is just a summary of some of the tools that we use. So yeah, Excel's a great one, but also like there's lots of accounting softwares that can save you a heck of a lot of work and brain work. So we use Xero for that. We use Wix for orders, so wholesale customers just plug in their order from an online availability list that I can update from the field on my phone. It sends us the automatic things, it invoices them through the website. It's really easy, and then we just send to an air printer on the farm. It prints out all the orders Monday morning, and we can pack and deliver 2 grand of veg on a Monday. And that's only because of good systems. Like, it'd be chaos if we didn't. It was chaos when we first started. Didn't have those systems. So learn from our mistakes and do some of those things earlier on. We use like Ubi for veg boxes as well, which has been really amazing. It's allowed us to be much more flexible and do that sort of thing. And also like getting accountants, getting help when you need, getting the support for those like financial things that a lot of us as growers are very averse to. Get the help you need and do that accurate and detailed crop planning, profitability of crops, reconcile your costs and your budgets, and see if you can like kind of stay on track. So by the time we're looking at now we're sort of 70% through the year. Are we 70% through our income target, or maybe a bit more because it's been summer? But yeah, we can check that we are. And if we're like only 50%, it's like, oh shit, like we need to like reassess, or we need to change some labour decisions, or etc. Because it's too late to do it retrospectively and reactively. Sorry, I had to rush the last bit a little bit, but hope some of that was useful. Thanks very much, and I can stick around for questions. Rain's coming in. We can do a couple of questions.
So, like, how did you learn to do this kind of stuff? Are there particularly good resources that you can refer to that, like, will have help?
Good question. I mean, I had the the background of studying economics and things, but actually most learned like about the real life economics and stuff through actually starting the farm enterprise and then kind of applying my head to it. So yeah, I'm being encouraged by various like business mentors and books and things. So that the book I mentioned, like Ben Hartman, The Lean Farm, is really good. Also, like some of the more like hard-headed books of like that we might not comfortably want to go into of like economics of growing. It might even just be for conventional growing, but like looking at kind of cash flow. There's like the Organic Growers Manual, which has got lots of useful tables and stuff of how you calculate your veg profitability. I'd also say like voices like Richard Perkins and Curtis Stone that like very much focus on the more hard-headed economics were actually very useful input, just to like take what's useful from them, and because they've actually shown that you can like have these really thriving, profitable farm enterprises if you kind of put that economic hat on sometimes. So I'd say like some of their YouTubes, like Richard Perkins, looking at looking at actually how you calculate what's profitable for that enterprise, like take what's useful from it, and likewise for this, take what's useful and discard the rest. Sorry?
What was the manual you mentioned?
I think there's the Organic Growers Manual, and there's also there's something like the Farm Business Handbook, which is really useful. We've got a load in the farm barn on the library that's hopefully it's not too like overwhelming. Hopefully it can be a bit demystified. Like some of these tools don't require like real Excel, like being a real whiz. I'm not at all. It's like they require like getting curious about your crops and the day to day and the small details of the farm, and then applying them and get help if you need from like accountants and people like that. Cool. And that's a wrap up. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.